From the moment FDR ordered tunnels dug beneath the White House while bombs fell on London, to the morning JFK learned about them during the Cuban Missile Crisis with his hand hovering over nuclear weapons, to the revelation that we still don't know if half of them even work anymore, this is every secret escape route built for American presidents explained. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why America built an entire hidden city under Washington D.C., who almost had to use it, and what happens to the people who know all the secrets. This is the story of presidential paranoia transformed into engineering. It's about fear, ingenuity, and the fact that somewhere beneath the streets you walk, there are passageways and bunkers that have shaped how American presidents make decisions in their darkest hours. Before FDR, presidents didn't have secret tunnels, they had secret routes. And those routes were basically, get on a horse and hope nobody shoots. Let's start with the beginning. It's 1789. George Washington is the first president of the United States. The White House is brand new, more a symbol than a fortress, and Washington lived with a constant, quiet terror. What if they come? The British had been defeated, but just barely. There were still people who wanted him dead. There were still factions in Congress who thought a new nation with a president was a bad idea. So Washington did what any scared man does. He found escape routes. The White House had multiple exits, simple passageways cut into the stone. Nothing fancy, just doors that led to gardens and gardens that led to a horse. If things got bad, if a riot reached the residence, if an assassin got through the guards, Washington could leave through the back. He'd ride to a safe house about 12 miles away in Maryland. It would take 30 to 40 minutes on horseback. By the time anyone realized he was gone, he'd be at a fortified mansion belonging to a trusted ally. That was the presidential escape plan for George Washington. A horse, a safe house, and prayers that nobody followed too closely. By the time Andrew Jackson became president in 1829, this had become standard. The president had escape routes. They were documented, at least to a small circle of people. They involved multiple safe houses across Maryland and Virginia. They involved armed escorts, but they were still just routes, not systems, not infrastructure. Abraham Lincoln changed this, not because he wanted to, but because people were actively trying to kill him. It's April 1861. The Civil War has just started. Lincoln is the president of a nation tearing itself apart, and there are assassination plots against him constantly. Serious plots. Not rumors, actual documented conspiracies. So Lincoln's security team, the first real presidential security detail in history, did something novel. They built passages. Underneath the White House, they excavated secret tunnels, not elaborate ones. Think of them as glorified hallways reinforced with stone and timber. The main tunnel connected the residence to the executive stables, so Lincoln could escape from the house to a horse without being seen from the street. Another tunnel led toward the Treasury building. Were these truly secret? No. Enough people knew about them that they were semi-documented, but they were certainly not public knowledge. If you were a random White House visitor in 1862, you wouldn't know that beneath your feet there was a passage the president could use to disappear. Lincoln also commissioned the first presidential armored carriage, not made of steel but reinforced wood and iron. He had a personal guard at all times. He rotated his travel routes. He lived like a hunted man, which he was, and even with all these precautions, it didn't matter. On April 14, 1865, Lincoln decided to ignore the protocols. He went to Ford's Theater without adequate security. He didn't use his escape route or his guards or his carriage. John Wilkes Booth shot him. The most elaborate escape system in American history at that time couldn't save him because the president refused to use it. The lesson was brutal and simple. A president can have all the escape routes in the world, but if he won't use them, they don't matter. After Lincoln's assassination, every president understood one thing: you need options. Theodore Roosevelt took this seriously. He expanded the tunnel system at the White House. He established multiple safe houses, not just in Maryland, but in Virginia too. He introduced the presidential train, a massive armored locomotive that could carry the president hundreds of miles in relative safety. He had a personal yacht, the USS Potomac, that could escape down the Potomac River if Washington became compromised. Roosevelt's protocol was more systematic than anything before him, but it was still ad hoc. There was no coordinated plan. If Roosevelt had to flee Washington, the Secret Service would quickly figure out the best route and go. There was no emergency operations center. There was no bunker. There wasn't even a clear chain of command about what happened if Roosevelt had to disappear. It was organized paranoia, but it wasn't yet infrastructure. By the time Woodrow Wilson became president in 1913, rumors were circulating about a tunnel system connecting the White House to the Treasury building. Wilson never officially confirmed this, and historians still debate whether it was actually built or just a persistent urban legend. But the pattern was clear. The technology was advancing, the threats were real, and the protocols were becoming more sophisticated. Wilson lived through World War I. He watched Europe destroy itself. He understood, perhaps more clearly than any president before him, what modern warfare looked like. Industrial-scale destruction, thousands of planes, entire cities obliterated. And he understood something else. It could happen here. But Wilson died in 1924, before he had to confront that fear on any serious level. It took one more president and one more war to make the government finally say, we need to build something real. It's May 1940. The Germans invade France. The British Army barely escapes across the Channel. The Luftwaffe begins bombing London systematically. Night after night, German bombers drop tons of explosives on the city. Buildings collapse, hundreds of people die, thousands become homeless. Franklin D. Roosevelt is watching this from across the ocean, and one thought is consuming him. It could happen here. If it can happen to London, it can happen to Washington, D.C. FDR is 58 years old. He's been president for 7 years. He's led America through the Great Depression, and now he's watching the world go to war, and he's asking himself, if Germany can reach London, can they reach Washington, D.C.? The answer is no. Germany doesn't have the capacity to mount a serious bombing campaign against the USA. The ocean is in the way. The logistical challenge is insuperable. But FDR isn't thinking about logistics. He's thinking about what he saw happen to London. So he makes a decision that will change American presidential security forever. He commissions the construction of an elaborate tunnel system beneath the White House. Not a simple passage, not an escape route. A genuine infrastructure, an entire underground network that would allow the government to function even if the city above was destroyed. The project is kept so secret that most of the workers who dig the tunnels don't know what they're actually building. Some think it's a subway line, others think it's a bomb shelter. A few suspect they're building something for the president, but the real scope, the sheer scale of it, is compartmentalized so thoroughly that nobody has the full picture except FDR and a handful of military engineers. By 1942, there are tunnels connecting the White House to the Treasury building. By 1943, there's a tunnel system reaching the Capitol. There are multiple exits and entrances. There's a bomb shelter 7 stories deep beneath the east wing of the White House, a facility that could sustain the president and his staff for weeks if the city above was destroyed. The cost is extraordinary. We're talking about millions of dollars in 1941 money, the equivalent of tens of millions today. The scale is extraordinary. We're talking about excavation and reinforcement that takes hundreds of workers months to complete. And the most extraordinary thing of all, almost nobody knows it happened. FDR never gives a public announcement. Congress is never asked to formally approve the project. It's just built, in the shadows, beneath the streets, waiting for a catastrophe that hopefully will never come. And that's the moment presidential escape routes transformed from ad hoc protocols into genuine infrastructure. That's the moment America built a shadow government to replace the one above ground if everything else failed. Here's what makes this story so strange. If you walk the streets of Washington, D.C. even today, you would pass over these tunnels and never know they were there. They're not marked on any public map. There are no signs. There are no tour groups. They exist in a space between classified and legendary. What we do know comes from leaks, from declassified documents, from Secret Service veterans who've written books, and from the occasional architectural photograph that slips out. And what we know is this: there's an entire network. The White House to Treasury Building Tunnel, first connection, roughly 150 feet, operational since 1942. The White House to Capitol Building Tunnel, a longer route, multiple segments, confirmed in 1943. The Underground Railroad System, not an actual train initially, but underground passages connecting multiple government buildings. The Eisenhower Executive Office Building basement contains secure passages and storage areas. The PEIC Main Corridor, the Presidential Emergency Operations Center tunnel system, 7 stories deep, 54,000 plus square feet. Camp David Underground Facilities, a bunker system in the Maryland mountains, multiple levels. Raven Rock Mountain Facility, a buried bunker in Pennsylvania, rumored to have tunnel connections. Pentagon Tunnel Network connects to government infrastructure, multiple exits. The President's Park, a massive underground facility mentioned in 1980s declassified documents and then never discussed again. That's what we know for sure. But here's what we don't know: the full extent, the actual layout, whether they're still functional, if they're regularly maintained, how many there are. Some of this has been classified so thoroughly that even congressional committees struggle to get information. Think about that for a second. An entire infrastructure built to protect the president, and even Congress doesn't have complete visibility into it. When Dwight D. Eisenhower becomes president in 1953, he inherits the tunnel system FDR built. But FDR's tunnels by that point are over a decade old. They were built for a threat that never materialized: German bombing. Eisenhower is now facing a completely different threat: Soviet nuclear weapons. In 1961, Eisenhower commissions a new project, the Presidential Emergency Operations Center, the PEIC. This is not an upgrade to FDR's tunnels. This is a complete reimagining of presidential security infrastructure for the nuclear age. The PEIC is 7 stories beneath the east wing of the White House. It's excavated in absolute secrecy. The specification is simple: it needs to survive a nuclear strike. Depth 200 plus feet below street level. Area 54,000 plus square feet, about half the size of a football field, but 7 stories tall. Construction: reinforced concrete, multiple layers, blast-hardened doors. Capacity: 300 plus people. President, immediate family, senior staff, military command. Power: 3 independent generators, so if one fails, 2 more take over. Water: completely self-sufficient system with emergency reserves. Food: supplies for 60 plus days of continuous occupation. Communications: completely isolated from public internet, dedicated satellite links, radio systems. Air: specialized filtration systems designed to protect against biological and chemical weapons. The PEIC is not a comfortable place. It's cold, it's deep. It's designed to be functional, not pleasant, but it's designed to work. If Washington D.C. is destroyed, the president can retreat into the PEIC and theoretically survive for weeks while military command continues to function. Multiple tunnel systems connect the PEIC to other secure locations. There are supposedly at least 3 separate escape routes from the PEIC itself, so if one is blocked, there are others. But here's the thing about the PEIC: it was built to survive nuclear war. What it actually looks like, who maintains it, whether it's ever been tested in a crisis situation beyond a few drills, none of that is public knowledge. October 16, 1962. President John F. Kennedy is having breakfast in the residence when he gets a phone call. It's his National Security Advisor, McGeorge Bundy. "Mr. President, we have a problem, a serious problem." Kennedy puts down his coffee. What he hears is this: Soviet missiles have been spotted in Cuba, not threats, not hypothetical weapons. Actual nuclear missiles, 90 kilometers from American soil, pointed directly at major U.S. cities including Washington, D.C., Miami, and New York. For the next 13 days, the world held its breath, and Kennedy, now 45 years old, was making decisions that could result in nuclear war. What most people don't know is that on day 1 of the crisis, Kennedy was given a full briefing about the escape routes. They walked him through the contingencies. "Mr. President, if the missiles are launched, you have options. There's a bunker, there's an evacuation protocol, there's a helicopter on the lawn, there's Air Force One standing by." They were telling the President of the United States how to survive World War III. Kennedy actually requested to visit the PEIC during the crisis. He wanted to see what it looked like, how deep it went, how long they could stay down there. Because if the choice became launch nuclear weapons or watch your country destroyed, Kennedy needed to know that there was a place to survive and continue fighting. According to declassified accounts, Kennedy examined the bunker. He asked specific questions. He wanted to understand the logistics of abandonment. If Washington was destroyed, how would the government function? How long could they survive underground? Could communications reach the military? But in the end, Kennedy never went down into the tunnels, because they came back from the brink. On October 28th, Khrushchev blinked first. The Soviet Union agreed to remove the missiles. The standoff ended. The president never had to choose between death above ground or isolation below. But the tunnels remained, and Kennedy carried the knowledge that if the crisis had continued for another day, he might have had to use them. Being president means knowing things that can't be unknown. It means understanding with perfect clarity that your death is not a statistical possibility. It's a calculated risk that security teams spend billions of dollars trying to mitigate. Every modern president is walked through the escape routes. They're shown the bunkers. They're briefed on evacuation timelines. They understand the protocols, and they carry that knowledge like a weight. Richard Nixon knew about the tunnels when he was paranoid and taping conversations in the Oval Office. Gerald Ford knew about them when he was the accidental president. Ronald Reagan knew about them when the Soviet Union was watching his every move. And here's a detail that matters. Most of them never wanted to go down there. It's not comfortable. It's not reassuring. A bunker doesn't feel like the seat of power. It feels like a tomb waiting to be occupied. One former White House communications specialist who worked in the bunker during an unspecified crisis, he was never allowed to name it, described the experience this way. You're sitting in a room with the most powerful person in the world, and both of you know that everything above you is either gone or burning, and you're trying to make decisions about a country that might not exist, and the only thing you can think about is how cold the room is and how long the food is going to last. That's not leadership. That's the end of everything. And yet, the bunkers remain. They're maintained. They're updated. Every new administration is shown the escape routes. The protocols are refined, because the fear that built them is permanent. The moment you remove the escape route, you've decided you're willing to die here. No president has ever made that decision. Let's talk about what we know the system looks like in 2024. It's massive, it's layered, it's redundant, and it's probably partially obsolete. The most famous is the Presidential Corridor, a tunnel system connecting the White House to an underground bunker that can supposedly survive a nuclear strike. It's reinforced concrete, multiple stories deep, with blast doors that weigh several tons each. Sources claim it extends for miles, but that's probably exaggeration. More likely, it's a series of connected passages, each designed for a specific purpose. There's a tunnel system beneath the Capitol building. Congress has its own escape route. There's an underground train system that connects multiple government buildings. There are supposedly multiple entrance and exit points, so that if one is compromised, there are others. Connected to the PEIC are tunnel systems. One leads to the Treasury building, one leads to the Capitol, one apparently heads toward the Department of Defense, one supposedly goes toward a classified direction, Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia. Nobody outside the military knows for sure. The centerpiece is the Presidential Emergency Operations Center, the PEIC, 7 stories beneath the east wing of the White House. But that's just the main facility. There are other bunkers. Camp David has a full underground complex. The Eisenhower Executive Office building has secure basement areas. Raven Rock Mountain in Pennsylvania supposedly houses a massive bunker. There's a classified bunker somewhere in the Mid-Atlantic region that nobody will discuss. The Department of Defense has its own bunker system, presumably connected to the presidential network. There's allegedly a massive facility called President's Park that exists underground, but this is more legend than confirmed fact. And then there are the modern systems. Air Force One isn't just a plane, it's a flying bunker. It has its own communication systems. It can refuel in the air. It can fly for essentially indefinite periods. If the president needs to get out of Washington in seconds, Air Force One is always minutes away. There are also decoy planes. Yes, the government maintains decoy Air Force Ones that can take off and confuse potential attackers about where the president actually is. The Secret Service has also developed evacuation protocols so sophisticated that they've never been publicly described. We know they exist because former agents have mentioned them in interviews, but the details are classified. And then there are the routes from earlier presidencies that technically still exist but are probably never used. The original tunnels FDR dug in 1942. Safe houses in Maryland and Virginia that were established in the 1950s. Train stations that were built specifically for presidential evacuation but haven't been used in decades. Helicopter landing zones at specific locations throughout D.C. Naval vessels on permanent standby in the Potomac River. How many escape routes exist? Somewhere between 40 and 70, depending on what you count. Tunnels, 9 to 12 major tunnel systems. Bunkers, 8 to 12 bunkers or underground facilities. Aircraft, 8 to 10 aircraft on permanent standby. Naval, 3 to 5 naval vessels. Ground, multiple ground vehicles and overland routes. Safe houses, multiple safe houses and classified locations. Protocols that probably number in the hundreds. It's an entire shadow infrastructure built on the assumption that the world above might someday stop existing. There's an elephant in the bunker, and it's this. The escape routes and bunkers were built to protect against threats that have fundamentally changed. They were designed to protect a president from conventional bombing during a world war. Then they were updated to protect against nuclear strikes. Then they were updated again to protect against terrorism. But they were never updated to protect against the threats that actually exist now. What happens in a biological attack? What happens if a cyber weapon takes down the communication systems? What happens if the bunker itself becomes a trap because the air filtration system is compromised? And here's the darker question. What happens to the president if he goes into a bunker and refuses to come out? If the situation is bad enough that he's down there, and the pressure to make decisions is overwhelming, and the isolation starts to affect his judgment, who stops him? There are protocols, supposedly, but the protocols were written by lawyers and generals who've never actually had to implement them. Former CIA Director Michael Hayden once said in an interview that the government's most closely guarded secret isn't the location of the bunkers or their specifications. It's whether they'd actually work if you had to use them. Nobody wants to test it, and nobody wants to find out in a real emergency that the system is broken. Here's the part that's almost funny if it wasn't so heavy. The escape routes built for the worst imaginable scenarios have almost never been used for their intended purpose. During 9/11, Vice President Cheney was rushed to the PEIC. But President Bush was already on Air Force One heading to an undisclosed location. They weren't hiding in the tunnels, they were flying away. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, the tunnels existed but weren't used. During the Cold War, there were several moments when presidents asked to be briefed on evacuation procedures, but the actual evacuation never happened. The bunkers and tunnels have been used for other things. Tour groups, highly restricted, have been taken through certain sections. Some areas have been retrofitted into storage. One section of the tunnel system reportedly contains an archive of sensitive documents, but the fundamental purpose, protecting a president from a catastrophic attack on Washington, D.C., has never actually been tested in reality, which means we have no idea if they work. Here's what nobody expected. The technology that was supposed to make presidents safer might have actually made the escape routes obsolete. Modern air defense is so sophisticated that attacking Washington, D.C. in a conventional way is nearly impossible. The city is covered by the most advanced radar and missile defense systems in the world. Fighter jets can be airborne in minutes. The no-fly zone around the Capitol is permanent and absolute. Nuclear attack? That's the scenario the bunkers were really built for. And the truth is, if a nuclear weapon detonates over Washington, D.C., the bunker 7 stories underground might buy a president a few extra hours before the radiation and structural damage become unsurvivable. That's it. It's not salvation, it's a delay. So what's actually protecting the president now? Mobility. Air Force One can get him out of Washington in minutes. Once he's in the air, he's protected by the most powerful military in the world. Once he's in the air, he's potentially safer than any president in history. The elaborate escape routes built for a different era are now backup plans for backup plans. There's a specific group of people in government who know everything about the escape routes and bunkers. They're not famous, you'll never know their names, but their job is to know. They're the people who maintain the systems, the Secret Service agents who guard the entrances, the engineers who update the technology, The military officers who coordinate the protocols, the lawyers who write the legal frameworks for what happens if the president has to use them. They carry a strange burden. They know things about American infrastructure and presidential vulnerability that they can never discuss. They can't even tell their families. One former White House communications specialist who worked in the bunker during an unspecified crisis, he was never allowed to name it, described the experience this way. You're sitting in a room with the most powerful person in the world, and both of you know that everything above you is either gone or burning, and you're trying to make decisions about a country that might not exist anymore. And the only thing you can think about is how cold the room is and how long the food is going to last. That's what we've built, not just tunnels and bunkers, but a psychological reality for presidents. There is a place where you go when everything else has failed. Here's what I think about when I think about these tunnels. A president has never had to use them for their intended purpose. The Cuban Missile Crisis ended because Kennedy and Khrushchev stepped back from the brink. The Cold War ended without nuclear fire. 9/11 was a catastrophe, but it didn't destroy Washington D.C.'s government structures. The escape routes were built on a fear that, in America's experience, hasn't materialized. And yet, we continue to build them. We continue to maintain them. We continue to walk each new president through the protocol of abandonment. Because here's the thing about preparing for the worst. Once you start, you can never stop. The moment you take down the bunkers, you're betting everything on the idea that the worst will never come. And no president has ever been willing to make that bet. So they remain, hidden, maintained, waiting for an emergency that hopefully will never come. And somewhere beneath the streets of Washington, D.C., there's a tunnel network and a bunker and escape routes that represent something uniquely American. We are terrified of destruction, so we build the most elaborate system to survive it. We are afraid of helplessness, so we engineer a way to maintain control even when everything around us is burning. We didn't invent the fear, but we absolutely perfected the escape route. Man, I love this country. But speaking of presidents who had to make impossible decisions in impossible times, and about the machinery of government that exists in the shadows, the story of presidential succession is even wilder than most people think. From the moment a president dies in office and a vice president has to take the oath, to the time JFK's death forced America to rewrite every protocol we had about power transfer, to the revelation that there's a classified list of people who could be installed as president if something catastrophic happened to the line of succession. This is how America really chooses its presidents. If you thought the secret escape routes were buried deep, wait until you see what we've hidden about the people who are supposed to take over when the president is gone. Click the video right here and subscribe so you don't miss it.